Welcome back to the Liberty Perspective. I'm Joe Marshall. Today I got a show for you. I want to do a show, population, baby boomer bump in the population pyramid. So it'd be versus excess deaths. But before I get into that, I got some information to bring you. Today marks my 50th. This is going to be my 50th show that I've posted. About a year. I didn't think I was going to be doing any shows. I didn't ever see me doing a podcast, but with the lack of freedom actually being in the medical freedom movement, or being that there's no such thing as an actual medical freedom movement, at least from a liberty perspective, from a founding principles, founding idea of America, our natural endowed by our creator individual rights and liberty, our constitutional republic, right? From that perspective, there's no such thing as a medical freedom movement as we're being told that it's out there. I was forced to kind of go out on my own, start calling these people out, which, you know, if you could tell when you listen to my early shows, I was a little hesitant on doing it because I was by myself. I've been doing a lot of things on my own here, but I was trying to hoping that medical freedom movement was what they were saying it was, what Shannon Joy was telling us it was, all the while knowing that all these people were full-blown progressives. Wow, have they seen the light in their progressive ways? No, they never did. They never did. And they hit it well. But it was always there. But anyways, that said, I got 50 shows. This is the 50th show. I've also posted my first show. I posted my first introductory show on YouTube. So I'm going to be posting this one on YouTube, and I'll be posting my new shows there. And, you know, every once in a while, I'll bring them some of the, you know, the YouTube audience there that's interested in a liberty perspective of things. Introduce them to some of the my older shows too. I'll be bringing some of them over. But so it's a step to broaden my horizons beyond just Rumble, because Rumble's just as captured as any of the rest of them, right? But the other thing is that I want to, you notice I'm wearing my a winter corrections hat with a badge from the New York State Department of Corrections logo on the front. I can't have my gig line too straight or it'll get me for impersonating an officer or some damn thing. But I want to wear this in support of my brothers and sisters, New York State Corrections officers. And if you didn't know, or if you weren't aware, the shit's hitting the state fan here in New York State as far as our prisons go. The officers are pushing back. They're pushing back against this, what they call the HALT legislation. Essentially, there's other things that are involved. But the HALT legislation has been ongoing for about a decade now. And what it is, I don't know what the acronym actually stands for, but it comes out of the United Nations. It's essentially, what HALT legislation is essentially, I don't even know if most corrections officers even are aware of this. It's world socialism of the United Nations being codified into New York State law and law enforcement directives, including the Department of Corrections. On the street, part of that was, you know, they used to have what they call stop and frisk, you know, when you had reasonable cause to believe that you could stop and frisk somebody. They pushed back on that. Well, how it affects officers in a correctional setting inside our prisons is on the street when an officer, you know, somebody's, you know, committing a crime, or the officers will come and they'll stuff them and cuff them and take them to jail, right? And then he has his day in court. Well, in a jail setting, when the inmate and general population is committing a crime or has committed a crime, the officers will come and stuff and cuff them and take them to jail. which is affectionately referred to as the box, or solitary confinement, generally because the guy is a threat, not probably to anybody else at the time that he's being stuffed and cuffed and throw him into jail, right? You're not going to throw him into a bunch of other people, especially if he's been assaultive, you know, be it to officer, other civilian staff, or, you know, other inmates. It doesn't matter. You stuff them, cuff them, throw them in jail. Well, what HALT legislation does is that the United Nations, the world socialism of this HALT legislation through the United Nations, has declared that as torture. It's torture. So I don't know. Maybe they should just give them all a bunkie, and maybe that would get around it, right? You throw them into a box, you put 2 to a cell instead of 1, and then who knows? They'll probably beat the shit out of each other then, right? But you throw a guy in jail, when you throw a guy in jail, that's considered torture. So can you imagine if an officer's on the street had to deal with the same kind of shit, that they couldn't freaking put a guy in jail unless somebody in Albany told him it was okay to put him in jail? The officers, the supervisors, the watch commander, the captains, the deputy security, the superintendent himself doesn't have the authority to box a guy anymore. It has to come from Albany. Yeah. Far cry from the days of the warden, when the warden, even the governor would have a hard time superseding a warden in a prison, you know. But, they're pushing it back against this. And through that, not being able to, you know, their ability through this HALT legislation, their ability to police what they're supposed to be policing has been compromised. The safety of the officers has been compromised. The safety of the civilian staff has been compromised. The ability to be able to police what they're supposed to be policing in there has compromised the safety of the inmates themselves. But they're pushing back. And that's what they're doing. Is yesterday, the job action or strike or whatever it is that they're calling it, I'm not even sure, has spread to over 20 facilities. You know, the state's been dogging these officers. Our prison systems here in New York State have been severely understaffed to the point where when I left 10 years ago, it'll be 10 years this spring, I've been out, retired. But when I left, it was illegal for anybody to work over 16 hours straight. You had to have at least 8 hours of in between the next shift. Today, they're sticking these guys 2, 3, 4, even 5 or more shifts straight. And now they've got them locked in the facilities. They've locked officers, literally imprisoned these officers in jail. And they won't let them go home. They can't go home. And if they do want to go home, I'm here, and they got to sign a letter of resignation before they even are allowed to leave. They just got to call home to their wives and families. They're not getting a chance to. They're literally spending more time with the inmates. The inmates know these officers and spend more time with these officers than their own families have been able to spend with them. And they're pushing back. And the only thing frickin' Hochul can tell them is, do your job. That's not going to go over well. But today, in part of the show, too, that's why I'm wearing this hat. I'm wearing it in support of my brothers and sisters, the officers in our prisons here. And law enforcement in general that are all being dogged by, this in that HALT legislation. Yeah, it's the world socialism of HALT legislation through the United Nations, but it embodies the whole of anarchist doctrine that stems from like Emma Goldman's Abolish All Prisons. Cornell University has been coming into the prisons teaching race, space, and place curricula, which is critical race theory, basically teaching the inmates that the only way you can ever be emancipated is to burn the system down. I did a couple shows on that. I've done a couple shows pushing back on critical theory in Defense of America series. I've done a couple, 2 or 3 shows on that too. You can see that on Rumble, my page on Rumble. But this is where we're going, and I just wanted to kind of bring a little bit of awareness to what's going on. You can go on Google, and you can Google New York State prisons strike or something like that, and you'll see all kinds of stuff popping up. But so that's the one thing that I want to mark this 50th show with, is a little support for my brothers and sisters that are officers and out there. And it's cold, man. They got burning barrels going with fires, and it's freezing, man. And the wind's blowing out of the north today. So a little something in support of them. The other thing is, I got some show prep for you to get to. Let me see if I can get this up here for you. Let's see what I got here. I should have had this up before, but there we go. All right. I got this whole baby boomer bump population pyramid versus excess deaths. And it's a question that you kind of ask yourself. They've been told a lot about these excess deaths since the pandemic came into, since the quote-unquote pandemic, right, 2019. They've been keeping track of these so-called excess deaths and what your chances of risk of dying has exponentially increases with age because of COVID. And there's some things I've looked up and I've been getting into that I'm going to share with you today. And it's just information for your consideration. I'm going to go down through a couple of these things. Just a little background. A little background on the whole population curve thing and excess deaths thing. The millennials. This was from 2020, okay? From 2020 here. The millennials took over the baby boomer population as the biggest part of our population starting in 2019. So the baby boomer bump comes up, the millennials but the millennials behind them now are a higher population of U.S. population than the baby boomers. Excess death mortality of baby boomers from COVID-19 pandemic in Taiwan. Let's start out with Taiwan just for a little background on this too. They did this article here assessing excess mortality of baby boomers from the COVID-19 pandemic in Taiwan. Omicron, naive, whatever that is. Baby boomer and non-baby boomer, baby boomer and non-baby boomer, excess mortality soared to 9%. Okay. And 10% respectively. So, this is published in 2024. When excess mortality soared to 9% and 10% respectively between baby boomers and non-baby boomers from January to June of 22. 6-month period, right? Surprisingly, baby boomers aged 58 to 76 experienced the same 9% excess mortality as non-baby boomers aged 77 and beyond. Non-COVID-19 deaths were more prevalent among baby boomers. Than non-baby boomers. They were more prevalent among baby boomers than non-baby boomers. And as the baby boomer population comes up into over 65 years old, right? Conclusion. Baby boomers were more likely to die from COVID-19 in early pandemic and had more non-COVID-19 deaths in late pandemic than older non-baby boomers, even than the older non-baby boomers. And they kind of, they correlate that to, it's kind of an anomaly, but they correlate that to the baby boomer generation being, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, man. They're the Woodstock generation, right? But, man. then they got this trend of aging in Taiwan. I wanted to show you this chart here. This is a percent of older than 65 from 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, 2030. And you can see that percent of older than 65 has become increasingly more and more of the percentage. There were in 1980 there were 4.3% of the population, and in 2020 they were almost 20% of the population. And it's a worldwide phenomenon. That's why I'm kind of showing you Taiwan to start with, but I'm also going to be showing you Europe and Canada, New Zealand. But some interesting related observations and sources I presented to the Cuyahoga County Legislature here in New York State back in August of 22. I did a presentation to New York State Legislature regarding the whole COVID situation at the request of one of the legislatures. One of these days I'm going to show that on one of my shows before they take it off the line. But anyways, World Meter says and this is what part of what I told them. The World Meter says that the U.S. still leads the world in COVID deaths, and ABC reports that there's been a 600% increase in COVID cases in the past year. Okay, and despite being only 10% of the population with the highest vaccination rates at 95.7% vaccinated and 83% double vaccinated at the time, those above life expectancy over 75, as Forbes reports, have accounted for 65% of the COVID deaths. So 10% of the population that were over 80, 10% of the, despite being only 10% of the population expectancy, those over 75 accounted for 65% of the COVID deaths. Meanwhile, globally, UNICEF has it that only 0.4% of COVID deaths have been younger than 20, with less than 0.02%, 0.02% being under 10. And they were still wanted to vaccinate those freaking kids, right? Stunning vaccine stat from 98.5% of U.S. seniors have had the shot. But this is the title. This is the title of that paper. It has nothing to do with the information. I've read a lot of these papers, and if you read just the title or you read just the conclusion, there's a lot of information that they throw out there in a lot of these studies. Besides a lot of it's just showing how much they're drinking the Kool-Aid. But on the other hand, they throw stats in there. There's the raw data that's in these things. You know what I mean? And in this paper here, it says the Kaiser Foundation, the Kaiser Family Foundation, they're a left-wing, full-blown progressive organization. You know, they're pro-universal health care and everything, you know. Oh, yeah. They report that adults ages 65 and up account for 16% of the population, but 80% of all COVID-19 deaths as of September 29th, and this was written in November of 21. Right? Don't want my gig line too straight there, but what the hell? Also, what share of people who have died of COVID-19 are over 65 and older, and how does it vary by state? This is another 2020 study. Kaiser Family Foundation. Got this here. Since the early days of the pandemic, COVID-19 has taken its greatest toll among older adults in the U.S. in terms of cases, hospitalizations, deaths. Months into the pandemic, older adults continue to be one of the populations most at risk. That's what that was the big push. They kept saying, well, the older population's at risk for COVID, man. We're going to tell everybody's got all this COVID, and then we're going to show you all these stats is the reason why COVID's killing them, right? Scare everybody into these vaccines, right? Older adults continue to be one of the populations most at risk of becoming seriously ill and dying from COVID-19, right? Adults 65 and older account for 16% of the U.S. population, but 80% of the COVID-19 deaths in the U.S., somewhat higher than their share of deaths from all cause, which was 75%. The percent of COVID-19 deaths accounted for by people 65 and older is consistently high and ranges from a high of 94% in the state of Ohio to a low of 70% in, I think, Texas and the District of Columbia. All right. And I got a chart that I'm going to show you in a minute that kind of lays that out, those state-by-state numbers, with the lowest being 70% and the highest being 94% of all COVID deaths being 65 and older. That's crazy. States have reported a larger share of adults 65 and older who have died of COVID-19 tend to be those states that have had a disproportionate number of deaths in the long-term care facilities. New York State here, boy, I tell you what, they had a big to-do about, nursing homes here and what they did. What they did in a nursing home here is depraved, to put it in a word, and all kinds of weird shit. I have a nephew that actually worked in a nursing home right when they put an end to the mandates on the vaccine. They did crazy stuff. But anyways, these include Idaho with 94%. And in that yellow, I'm going to show you that state by state, so I'm not even going to read that. But many in the states have reported a smaller share of adults 65 and older who have died of COVID. A smaller share of adults 65 or older compared to the national average, which was 80%. Remember, the national average is 80%. So the low states, they're saying that there are states that that report a smaller share of adults 65 and older who have died from COVID compared to the national average, that are in the South and the Sun Belt, including Alabama, which they had, remember, 80 is average. So they 76% of their COVID deaths were 65 and older, but they're ranked 20th on the list out of 50 with 17.8% over 65 years of age. I'm putting in red here, I'm putting the stats of what they're trying to tell you. They say, well, these states have lower, percentage than the national average in the Sun Belt, So I just wanted to put these stats in there too, so that you can get a better idea of what's actually happening here, what it means. This is just information for you to take into consideration. Tennessee, with 70% of its COVID deaths being over 65, was ranked 28th on the list out of 50 with a 17.1% of the population over 65. Nevada was ranked, Nevada with 75% was ranked 36th on the list out of 50 states, right? With 16.5% of their population over 65. Arizona, 74% of their 74% of their COVID deaths were in the over 65 group. They're ranked 12th with 18.5%. 18.5% of their population is over 65. There's not a huge difference between what is average and what is below average. I mean, the lowest state had 70% of their COVID deaths were in the over 65 age group. And I just wanted to show you, I'm getting those numbers from this chart. But anyways, you can see it. Then they have right here the state and the total resident population over 65, and that's the percent of their population that's above 65, and that's how I got those numbers. States that have experienced a large percentage of deaths at long-term care facilities are also likely to have a larger share of COVID-19 deaths in the oldest age cohort, those 85 and older. Right? Is that just have anything to do with COVID, or is that just something that was going to happen anyway? Right. The impact of population growth and aging on estimating. Let me try and fix this here for you. There. Sorry about that. The title of this study is the impact of population growth on aging on estimates of excess U.S. deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic, March to August 2020. This comes out of this study here. The 2020 U.S. population includes 5.4 million, 0.4 million. More persons aged 65 years and older than the average population in 2015 and 2019, which is a 10% increase in that population. There was a 10% increase in over 65 between 2015 and 2019. 10% increase. After population changes were taken into account, an estimated 217,900 excess deaths occurred from March through August 2020. Most excess non-COVID deaths occurred in April through July and August, and 34,900 or 78% were in persons aged 25 to 64. So 78% of those excess deaths were in age group 25 to 64. Why didn't they break that age group down from like 25 to 35, 35 to 45, 55 to 65 or 64, right? Why did they do that? Why did they 78% of them? And how much bigger is that group than the over 65 group? Why are they even throwing that stat in, or is it just a stat? I don't know. And those excess deaths were being caused by, they said, non-COVID excess deaths were being caused by diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and heart disease caused the most non-COVID excess deaths. So those were guys that they just couldn't get a positive test on, right? No. 80%. The COVID-19 pandemic resulted in an estimated 218,000 excess deaths in the United States between March and August of 2020. And 80% of those deaths had COVID-19 as the underlying cause. 80%. Accounting for population changes substantially. Population changes substantially reduce the excess non-COVID-19 death estimates. Yeah, because you've got the baby boomer bump, right? You got the baby boomer bump coming up into the over 65. And as you get older, the chances of you reaching life expectancy and dying is a reality, right? Yeah. But anyways, I kind of wanted to show you this too. Is this most excess non-COVID-19 deaths? 78% of them were in persons aged 25 to 64. Remember, the stat here is that per the Kaiser Family Foundation, adults 65 and older accounted for only 16% of the population, but 80% of the COVID deaths. All right. And I got this chart here. You can see that. This is Idaho up on top, 94%. If you can't read that, it's 94%. And they go all the way down. This red line is the United States average of 80% of the COVID deaths in the U.S. were ages 65, were above the age of 65. Lowest state being 70%. And that just kind of gives you a visual, I got a couple other charts in here for you to take into consideration too. This one, total COVID-19 deaths for people 65 or older. Now these charts come from July of 2020. But this is what the stats were, and that we were being fed this stuff back in 2020 when this whole pandemic was coming into full swing, right? But just to take a look at it a little bit different here, these are COVID deaths by the numbers per state, New York State by far. New York State's the top one with the most COVID deaths, like 31,700 or pretty close to that fact. But all these other states, all the COVID deaths in all the other states, New York is just right. But this blue, the blue aspect of this right here, those are people under 65. The green is all the people over 65. All the COVID deaths over 65. Kind of gives you a little bit of different perspective, right? And this is another one, too. Different chart here. It says share of COVID deaths by age. Okay, 2020 again. But you can see this green to the far left here. This green, these are all the COVID deaths, okay? This green is age group under 55. Everybody except for these greens is over 55. The dark blue, starting with the yellow, red, and light blue, those are all over 65. But just that green, that's everybody under 55 years old that got COVID deaths. A little bit of different perspective for you to take into consideration. Per the CDC, okay? Per the CDC, in October of 22, 81% of COVID deaths in 2020 occurred among those age 65 and over. So they went up a percent, the CDC did. Which, per the U.S. Census, represents only 16.8% of the population. Okay? 16.8% of the population. Coffee. Okay, the summary. This report presents U.S. mortality due to COVID-19 for the populations of age 65 and over during 2020. Overall, the number of deaths among adults age 65 and over for which COVID-19 was an underlying cause of death was 282,836, comprising 81% of the total COVID-19 deaths in the United States. COVID-19 mortality increased with age. The COVID-19 death rate among adults aged 85 and over was 2.8 times. Remember that number, 2.8 times higher than the rate of adults 75 to 84. So you're talking 10 years less, right? The COVID-19 death rate among adults 85 and over was 2.8 times higher than the rate of adults 75 to 84, and 7 times higher than the rate of adults aged 65 to 74. Now, them age groups, I don't know how they're averaging grouping these different age groups, but and the math would be different depending on what 10-year period you're talking about there. But you're going to see, and I'm going to show you, is that naturally the odds of dying as an adult over the age of 30 exponentially increase to the point where they double every 6 to 8 years. Anyways, regardless of disease, regardless of whatever disease that you've had, it doesn't change. Those odds of dying with increased age, I'm going to show you how they correlate and how they're very similar. And they could take this information and they can weave any narrative they want with those numbers, with whatever disease that they want. I just want to point that out. I'm not saying that's what they're doing. I'm just saying it can be done. Yeah. So you've got these numbers here in the yellow. 2.8 times higher than the rate for the 85 and over is 2.8 times higher than the rate for adults 75 to 84, and 7 times higher than the rate of adults age 65 to 74. Keep that in the back of your mind. By comparison, 38.9% of COVID deaths in adults aged 85 and over were in a nursing home. COVID-19 death rates in 2020 varied widely by state, with the highest rates for adults aged 65 and over found in New Jersey and South Dakota, North Dakota, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. That's a whole different bunch of states than they got up here. New Jersey. Where's Rhode Island? I'm not even seeing it. Rhode Island's way down here now. So things changed really quickly, is what I'm getting at, because that was back in, the chart was in 2020, and this is October 2022. Just to show you how quick things changed. Side stats per this right here. Older Americans profile. This came from 2020, or dated May 2024, regarding 2023. People 65 years old, older than 65, represent 17.3% of the population in the year 2022. So it's going up, right? The percentage is expected to grow to 22% by 2040. The number of older Americans has increased by 34%. Now, that's a number that you don't see every day. The number of older Americans has increased by 34%. Is there a date on this? Yeah, May 2024, right? Since 2012. Yeah, it's increased by 34% since 2012, compared to an increase of 2% in the population under 65. So the population under 65 increased by 2% 2012 since 2012, but by 34% in over 65. 3% of which have at least to some degree, have a disability to at least some degree. And this information comes from this article here. I got this chart. And the percentage of persons age 65 or older with a disability. And you can clearly see this is any 33%. It includes all disabilities of at least some kind. And they got different ones in here. Housing difficulty, 14%. Seeing, remembering stuff, 8%. Walking, you can't really walk, 21%. 7% self-care. They're in a self-care difficulty, and independent living difficulty. So you have all these different kinds of disabilities. So these are people that are compromised. Their health is compromised. 33% of the population over 65. And that's a stat that comes out of that as well. Also, per the U.S., that same U.S. Census data, in 2020, about 1 in 6 people in the United States were age 65 and over. In 1920, this proportion was less than 1 in 20. So it went from 1 in 20 in 1920 to 1 in 6 in 2020. All right? The older population increased by 50.9 million from 4.9 million, or at 4.7% of the population in 1920, to 55.8 million and 16.8% of the population in 2020. This represents a growth rate of 1,000%. The older population in the United States grew 1,000% from 1920 to 2020. Over 65 are the older population. In 2020, about 1 in 6 in the United States were age 65 and over. In 2020, that proportion was less than 1 in 20. Growth in older population spiked 2010 to 2020. So it spiked. The closer to today we get, the faster the over 65 is increasingly becoming a higher percentage of our population because of the baby boomer bump that's coming up. So the closer we get to today, the faster that over 65 population that goes up, the faster that we have people that are reaching life expectancy, the faster and more people that we're going to have that are going to be dying naturally anyway. Right? The older population has been growing for the past 100 years. But the decade before 2020 saw its fastest increase since 1880 to 1890. From 2010 to 2020, the 65 plus population experienced its. Okay, listen. From 2010 to 2020, the 65 plus population experienced its, quote, largest ever 10-year numeric gain. Okay, increasing an increase of 15.5 million people that are now in that age group. The next largest 10-year numeric increase, 5.7 million between 1980 and 1990, was less than half of that size. So it's that increase, that largest 10-year numeric increase that's happened in over 65 or the older populations, that happened from 2010 to 2020 was at least twice as high as the second largest increase, which happened between 1980 and 1990. And also, from 2010 to 2020, the 65 plus population experienced its largest ever percent point increase from 13% to 16.8% of the total population. And to put it in perspective, before 2010, it took 50 years from 1960 to 2010 for the older population share of the total population to grow by the same number of percentage points. So what happened in the previous, what took 50 years of increase, a percentage increase in the over 65, took just 10 years between 2010 and 2020. That's the baby boom bump coming up and exponentially increasing the population percentage over 65. From 2010 to 2020, the 65 plus population experienced its, quote, fastest growth rate, 38.6%, from 40.3 million to 55.8 million, and more than twice as fast as the previous decade of 2000 to 2010. The older population also grew 5 times faster than the local total population, which grew at a 7.4% rate. Under 65 grew at 7.4% between 2010 and 2020. Over 65 grew 38.6%. 38.6% population increase in over 65 in just 10 years. Do you think that when they start dying, it's going to be an excess deaths of maybe the previous 10 years? You know? If it's not taken into consideration, other considerations. I got other considerations to take in here, just to throw them out there for your consideration. The rate by which mortality increases with age is the same for those who experience chronic disease as for the general population. Like I told you before, like I was getting to before earlier, that as we get older, the odds that we're going to die exponentially increase. And they've actually put numbers to these things. They've known this since, I think 1825? We're going to get to that. But according to this study here, okay, this came out in May of 21. The rate by which mortality increases with age is the same for those who experience chronic disease as for the general population. It doesn't. It's kind of a neat study to take into consideration on what happens here, and I thought it was, interesting enough to show you. Okay, abstract. And in the background, mortality doubles approximately every 6 to 7 years during adulthood. Like I said, there it is. That's right from a white paper. And earlier they had a thing that I showed you that they were saying that the COVID chances of COVID increase with age, 6 to 7% or whatever, right? During age groups. This is what I was getting at. This exponential increase in death risk, with chronological age, is the population level manifestation of aging, and often referred to as the rate of aging. And their objective in this study is that we explore whether the onset of severe chronic disease alters the rate of aging. And this was done in 2021 during COVID. During COVID, right? During COVID. I got a chart here that's kind of interesting. Chart shows the age-specific death rates from age 60 and onwards of the subpopulations for 3 respective diseases and total populations. So I don't know if I can get this, maybe so you can see it a little bit better, maybe just to show you. Now, they've got, the red here is females, blue is males. And they've got what happens in life expectancy, age-specific death rate, your death rate, the odds of you dying as you get older on the bottom, 60, 65, 70, all the way up to 90 they've got, right? As you, myocardial infarction, okay, here with women, and that just shows that line right there is the median line of your chances of dying. And this line here, the black line, represents your natural death, your death rate of the total population anyways. And you can see how they're similar. With cancer in women, they merge, but it's not real far off. In diabetes, it's almost identical, right? And males, myocardial infarction, it merges. Men have a higher death rate after myocardial infarction than women, right? And cancer, too, they merge, but diabetes in men. But you can see it's not really that far off, okay? And that's kind of what is interesting. I thought it was interesting enough to show you. But discussion, we found that none of the analyzed diseases had a sustained effect on the rate of aging. You're still going to age. And as you get older, you're going to the odds that you're going to die exponentially increase regardless of disease. Regardless of disease. This is what this study is saying. Conclusion. Our results support the concept of an underlying process of aging causing mortality to increase with every year older we become, and suggest that this process is independent of disease history. I mean, when we go to investigate science today of anything that they're putting out there, what we're left with basically is bullshit science to try and prove bullshit science either right or wrong, or show bullshit science right or wrong. I mean, there's been studies out there from Harvard that show 95% or more. It's a, infamous study, right? 95% or more of science is bullshit for one reason or another. It's known. It's widely known. The bias, the funding bias, whatever, all right? Policymaker bias. So that's kind of a caveat right off the top, no matter what we're digging into here, right? So I'm not going to prove this with this paper and that paper, But that's how a lot of these academics look. They're like, these freaking papers are God, but, what the freaking hell, This is just information that's out there for your consideration. It's not like a lot of the stuff. I've never heard any of these things being put out there by anybody in the medical freedom movement for our consideration by anybody in the medical freedom movement. There's a lot that the medical freedom movement isn't, quote unquote, freedom movement isn't putting out there for our consideration, that they're keeping a lid on or whatever, while they maintain, I think their actual objective is to maintain a narrative of their own. you know. Yeah. So, our results support the concept of an underlying process of aging causing mortality to increase with every year older we become, and suggest that this process is independent of disease history. So now we've got larger and larger and larger, exponentially larger portions of our populations that are over 65 years old, increasingly, right? And in all older age brackets over 65. And then they said that this some groups are more vulnerable than others, therefore experience a higher level of mortality. But the effect of age hits everyone in the same manner. It's just a matter of time. How much money do you have to spend on a science degree before you can figure that one out, right? How much funding do you need before you can figure that one out? That's the whole thing with me in academia. I don't get it, man. You know, and if you really take academia to one step farther, and its whole enlightenment thing, the philosophical enlightenment thing, where the truth is never really the truth, it's unobtainable. It lives in the abyss of the dialectal, between the synthesis, between the thesis and the antithesis, and it's in the middle. And then the next time it's in the middle, it's like the half-life of gold. It's unobtainable. The actual death is unobtainable, just like truth in the dialectal is unobtainable. The death of any element is unobtainable in the half-life. It's always in the middle, man. It's always in the middle, man. It's always in the middle, man. It's unobtainable. So the end result of that, I mean, we don't even know what the word is. The meaning of the word is. I mean, when you take this whole concept of enlightened academia, right? It's in the dialectal. Everything's in the dialectal. So, bottom line out of that one, what I get is that the only thing you can really learn in academia is that you can never really know anything. That's what I get out of it. You can never really know anything. So, like I said before, save yourself the money, man. Because that's the end wisdom of academia, is that you can never really know anything. That's what I get out of it. But anyways, and the effect of age hits everybody in the same manner. It's just a matter of time, right? But what are those effects? By the numbers. France. Let's go to France. Age-specific mortality rates. This was 2012 to 2016. Comes from this. They got this overlaid pyramid. 2009 and 2024 overlay. And you can see that the populations are coming up. Okay, see this is where the population was 2009. Now those populations are out here. This is in Europe. The mortality rate is very low during childhood, then increases exponentially from age 30. It is lower for females of all ages. From birth to the first birthday, the risk of dying in France is very low today, 30 and 10,000, and most of these deaths occur immediately after birth. But this is what they're kind of setting up. That they're setting up a pattern. If you're good at recognizing patterns. It then rises exponentially by approximately 8% to 10%. Risk increases sharply in adolescence to as high as 2 in 10,000 for girls and 5 in 10,000 for boys aged 20. After age 20, it then rises exponentially by approximately 8 to 10% from 1 year to the next, doubling every 8 to 10 years. Doubling every 8 to 9 years, sorry. Excess male mortality is highest from age 20 to 30, probably because of your reckless youth, right? That's what I'm throwing out there. But the thing is here out of this whole thing that I'm trying to point out here is that doubling life, the chance of death rises exponentially by 8% to 10% from one age year to the next. So every year after 20 years old, your chance of dying increases by 8 to 10%. 8 to 10%. So by the time you get up to 65 and that population is over 65, and it's been doubling every 8 to 9 years, the odds of dying are doubling every 8 to 9 years, disease or no disease, right? Just throwing it out there for your consideration. You're probably his next study is that your probability of dying doubles every 8 years. Just another study to show the same thing here. In this study here from 2014, the math shows, in fact, that the likelihood that we kick the bucket before our next birthday doubles every 8 years. That's this study or paper. That's out of the, what is that, the Smithsonian? Yeah, that was the Smithsonian. Your body wasn't built to last. A lesson from human mortality rates from 2009. What do you think the odds that you will die during the next year? What do you think the odds are? Try to put a number on it. 1 in 100, 1 in 10,000. Whatever that number is, it'll be twice as large 8 years from now. That's according to this study. This startling fact was first noticed by the British actuary Benjamin Gompertz. I don't know how you say his name, but it looks like Gompertz in 1825. Like I said, I was right. I was wondering if I had that number right. Anyways, called the Gompertz Law of Human Mortality that they've known about since 1825. Your probability of dying during a given year doubles every 8 years. It's a known constant. Remember, Dennis, and it hasn't changed since 1825. This is what I'm getting. All the medical advancements, right? But anyways, remember Denny Rancourt? I've heard him say that age has nothing to do with it. But then I've also heard him say that he's the first one to say that age exponentially corresponds with the COVID shots being administered, right? But what do we got here? No, that page doesn't exist. Good thing I got another link to it, right? Oh, no. Good thing I got another link to it, right? I want you to listen to this.
Vaccine dose fatality rate discriminated by age and see what happens. So we did that. And what we found, to our surprise, was that the behavior was extremely regular with age of the person being injected. It was exponential with the age of the person, which means that the older you got, the higher and higher the risk of dying became. And the doubling time that doubles the risk is about 5 years. That means that the vaccine dose fatality rate discriminated by age and see what happens. So we did that. And what we found, to our surprise, was that the behavior was extremely regular with age of the person being injected. It was exponential with the age of the person, which means that the older you got, the higher and higher the risk of dying became. And the doubling time that doubles the risk is about 5 years. That means that for every 5 additional year of age, your risk of dying per injection doubles. So when you get up to the 90.
Sorry about that. I clicked that back too early, but it was worth hearing again anyways. But he's correlating that doubling every 5 years, when it's 6 to 8 years on all these other things, maybe 6 to 9 years. He's correlating that to the injections. So that doubling effect every 6 to 8 years is already there, and they've known about it since 1825. And Denis Rancourt's got his study that's correlating this known effect that they've known about since 1825 to the COVID. I don't know. That's just information I'm throwing out there for your consideration. But man, right? Man, he says that yeah. But the thing about Denis Rancourt is, he's traveling around with this clique, this freaking medical freedom clique all around Malone's minions, right? He's been invited with them because they've accepted his 17 million excess deaths. Ooh, wow, we got these 17 million excess deaths. They've taken that and they've run with it for whatever reason they're running with it. And now, but he's also, as part of that study, is that there's evidence of no pandemic spread. There's evidence of actual no pandemic spread or exponential spread or pathogenic spread of anything, right? Right. And he won't even push back on it. Said yet the medical freedom movement accepts the 17 million excess deaths, inviting him to join them in their globetrotting, but not his no evidence of pathogenic spread of anything, or for that matter, his observations that, and this is an article I found here, that he put out, all-cause mortality during COVID-19, no plague, and likely signature of mass homicide by government response. This was, I don't know, I think I read somewhere where this wasn't actually published, but I don't know why it's out there. Denis Rancourt, right? How many Denis Rancourts are there? But anyways, I just wanted to put that out there. He was calling it homicide. Is he still calling it murder? That there's no evidence of this pathogenic spread? The only thing that matters, I guess, is the 17 million excess deaths that he says he told Cooey on a show. I heard him tell Cooey on a show, oh, we've taken all that into consideration on the population pyramid. But I don't know, man. I'm going to show you a clip in a minute where that comes into question. But albeit that Denis Rancourt is absolutely no friend to America. Denis Rancourt is not a friend of America. Denis Rancourt is not a friend of individual liberty. He's not a friend of our republic. He's not a friend of a limited form of government. He's not a friend of free enterprise. And I did a show, three shows on the LaRoche Pack and the LaRoche cult and the weird shit of Matthew Ertz and the LaRoche putting out there the anti-Americanism, the undermining of American history. They're going back and fundamentally transforming American history to best suit their LaRochian agenda, which is correlated with pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, Silk Road, pro-BRICS, multipolar geopolitics, right? They've been on Russian television shitting on America. He was on there shitting on America with all the Marxist freaking economists and people from the Mises Institute, right? Or Mises Institute, right? I'm surprised Jeffrey Tucker hasn't been on there with him because he's bragging about being part of the Mises Institute, right? And the other guy that co-founded the Mises Institute, who basically says that the Constitution was hijacked by the anarchists who founded our country. So they're not constitutional people. The Mises Institute, where Malone was speaking his anti-capitalist rant on the psyops of was it surveillance capitalism and disaster capitalism, picking up the torch from Naomi Klein. Oh yeah, she's a real right-wing populist nationalist, right? Yeah, right. Well, anyways, correlate this Denis Rancourt in here. Matt Ert and his wife Cynthia Chung, they wrote this book, Breaking Free of Anti-China Psyops. And they just put this book out in December of 22. So the anti-China psyops, he's pro-China, he's pro-Russia, he's anti-American. But I just wanted to show you down here something that you might get a kick out of. I got a kick out of it. Denis Rancourt wrote a raving 5-star review of Matt Ertz, shitting on American freaking pro-Chinese book, and he's pro-China book. Breaking Free is a condensed and intricate collection of insightful and provocative ideas about China's recent trajectory in the world. It presents a perspective eminently more palatable to the intellect than that produced by commonplace Western media and armadas of geopolitical think tankers. Just putting it out there for your consideration, I don't think we need Denis Rancourt's support of anything, but that's what he is. He's a postmodern. He's a postmodern, anti-American, postmodern, pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, and he's traveling around with all these medical freedom people. He's not the only one. I mean, I don't think. Is there any one of those doctors? Name me one besides Ryan Cole who has even mentioned America's founding principles, America's founding republic, American Constitution, and binding limited form of government. Ryan Cole is the only one I've ever heard even mention it. But he's not calling out everybody else's progressivism all the way around him. He's not calling out Malone's anti-capitalism. He's not calling out Malhotra's freaking attack on our limited form of government, blaming our Constitution and limited form of government on. He blames the tyranny of COVID on that, saying, well, we need more government. You need universal health care, man. All that profit shit's getting in the way, which is a hit on capitalism, which is a hit on free enterprise, which is a hit on property rights and the ability for us to be able to independently pursue a happiness here. Without all that, it becomes impossible. And collectivism wins all the way around. That is what's driving the medical freedom movement today. Again, this is why I'm going out and digging into these things, because they're sitting on this shit. And they're not putting it out there for our consideration as being part of the equation to what's happening. Here's a British side-by-side chart showing the normal death rate versus 2020 alleged coronavirus death rates in ages 0 through 100 years of age. That's the from BBC. But this is kind of an interesting chart, too. The risk of dying each year. Okay. We've got large-scale... the blue is a normal male death rate from 0. Okay, death rate actually goes down from being born, right? But as you increasingly get older to 100 years of age, the percent chance of dying, the curve. They've got the blue curve here for male death rate. They got the orange line here for the normal female death rate, and then you've got the coronavirus death rate are the red dots. Is there a correlation, or is there no correlation? Looks like they're on the same rail to me. Just information putting out there for your consideration. Makes for an interesting, it's interesting. But it's also consistent with what we just saw before, where no matter what disease, it doesn't change your rate of aging and the exponential increase of your chances of dying every 10 years. It doesn't affect it, right? Just like any other disease. Another one of England's from England another one from England showing COVID mortality by age versus the background age increased death rate or normal chance of death increasing with age. This is an interesting too. He got this chart here. He got the percent of dying each year that's normal. Okay, dotted line is males. Hard line, gray line is females, and the dots again are mortality with COVID-19. as you go from 0 to 100 and the exponential increase in your rate of dying. They told us that COVID is only hitting the old. Well, if COVID existed as a disease that was changing or altering the natural process and rates of death, wouldn't it be affecting people with younger ages? Wouldn't there be something? But this is like, and now are they taking that information, and are they spinning narrative after narrative after narrative for whatever reason off this same chart to correlate it to climate change? It could be correlated to COVID. It could be correlated to, whatever agenda that they want to push, right? I'm not saying that's what's happening. I'm just saying, look. The other thing about this article I found kind of amusing was it says this article was written in 2020, May of 2020, but March of 2020, but in May they had to add a caveat. They had to put a disclaimer in there that said the note added May 2nd, 2020. Some people seem to be interpreting this article as suggesting that COVID does not add to one's normal risk. They had to put a disclaimer on it, But look at it. It is what it is, right? With the above taken into consideration, let's take a renewed look at the science, quote unquote, science of the narrative, and see if you can pick out the centralized collectivist bullshit that passes for science. This is all those things are being correlated off those numbers that are going to happen anyways, right? They got this article here, was estimating COVID-19 infection fatality ratio, accounting for whatever that is, using statistical modeling. The title of this doesn't pertain to the information that I'm getting out anyways. In the discussion of that, this is this article here. I looked that word up. I can't remember what it means. I did know what it meant when I put this on here, but I forgot it. Discussion, the summary, we provide a statistical framework to estimate COVID-19 infection fatality rates. Now, they got case fatality rates and infection fatality rates. That's just another way to throw shit in the game by using similar sounding things to throw things way off. It's just like, relative risk reduction versus absolute risk reduction. And that's how they really got people over on that whole COVID vaccine, the whole Pfizer vaccine. And Dr. Stephen J. Thomas, the guy who was the lead investigator for the test, that the study or the whole trial, vaccine trial that Pfizer did to prove the 95% efficacy of its own vaccine. The actual relative risk reduction on that, because what they did is 1%, like 0.0, if I can remember, 0.084, it's 0.088%, 0.88%, less than 1%, 0.88% of the people who didn't get the vaccine got COVID. Less than 1% of the people that didn't take the vaccine got COVID. 0.084% of the people that took the vaccine got COVID. All less than 1%. We're talking all less than 1%. But the difference between the 0.88% of people who got it that didn't take the vaccine and the 0.084% that did take the vaccine, the difference between those two is 95%. So when they told you that 95% efficacy, everybody's out there, well, it's 95% efficacy, man. 95% chance that I'm not going to get COVID if I take the vaccine, which is bullshit. It's a freaking bullshit. It's a lie. And it's a manipulation. It's a manipulation. And they did the same kind of shit with the difference between case fatality rates, which was PCR, and asymptomatic spread even, and quote unquote asymptomatic spread, asymptomatic, and then you've got the infection. Those people that are actually sick, I guess. I don't know. I'm not saying what that difference is. I'm just telling you there's a difference. In summary, we provide a statistical framework to estimate COVID-19 infection fatality rates that accounts for, among other things, variation in age-specific attack rates and delays from infections to death. We estimate that the overall COVID-19 infection fatality rate ranges from 0.15 to 0.43% in low-income countries to 0.79 to 1.82% in high-income countries. With the difference in those ranges reflecting the older demography of high-income settings. The older demography of high-income settings. So somehow they're going to correlate it to a need for some kind of redistributive justice. The IFR is also likely to vary depending on available health care and underlying health conditions. See it or not, that's a push for universal health care or a justification for more universal health care. Our results suggest that the overall risk of death from COVID-19 doubles with approximately every 8 years. They're putting this out there as science related to COVID. Now, I've showed you these other things to lead you up to this point where it says our results suggest that the overall risk of death from COVID doubles with approximately every 8 years of age. Our estimates of the IFR of COVID-19 are consistent with early estimates and remain substantially higher than IFR estimates for seasonal flu as the pandemic wanes and vaccines are allocated, right? It's important to update previous IFR estimates from the first wave of the pandemic to reflect and justify past interventions and risk mitigations. Right? But you can see, we went through all that stuff I just went through, and then you read something like this where they're putting all this, I'm drinking all this freaking Kool-Aid, I'm going to justify the vaccines, I'm going to justify the interventions, I'm going to justify the freaking mitigations. I'm going to tell you that no matter what the percentage are, and the older populations and younger populations, no matter what they are, I'm going to correlate to the need for more redistributive justice. It's all pushed for the socialism. The cure is collectivism, man, right? That's what collectivist revolution is. I got this pyramid here, population pyramid overlap from 2010 to 2020, and you can see the dark being 2020, how the bump that's down here is now crowding 60 over 60, and more than half of that bump is now over 65. That's the baby boomer bump coming up into the over 65 population, which would mean that you're going to have more people dying anyways, exponentially with increase in age, right? What was it like? They said it's like 10%, 8 to 10% increase every year of chance of dying over 20, and it stays the same since 1825, right? I don't know. Maybe they didn't say it stayed the same since 1825, but it's been around since 1825 that they've known about. Superimposed on this, okay, superimposed 2010 and 2020, age sex pyramids show that how the aging of the baby boomer generation affected the age distribution of the United States. In 2010, baby boom population appears as a bulge in the middle of the pyramid at ages 46 to 64. In 2020, the bulge is higher when the boomers were ages 56 to 74. That's what I was getting at earlier. Nearly half were over 64. That's what I said. By 2030, the baby boomers will be age 65 and over. all baby boomers will be age 65 or older, and the growth in the older population is projected to start falling. So it's not going to start falling. The growth isn't going to start falling. It's still going to have growth, but the growth is going to start falling in 2030. In 2020, the 65 to 74 age group, this is from this same study here. I'm estimating the COVID-19 infection fatality ratio accounting for seroreversion. I don't know. I can't remember what that is, and it doesn't really matter to what the information that we're getting out of it. But yeah. In 2020, the 65 to 74 age group experienced the largest growth of any older age group the previous decade. In the previous decade, its numbers grew by 11.4 million, or 52.5% in 2020. It grew 52.5%, increasing from 21.7 million in 2010 to 33.1 million in 2020. So between 2010 and 2020, the 65 to 74, not over 65, but just the 65 to 74 grew by 52.5%. The 75 to 84 age group grew at 25.1%. The 85 to 94 age group grew at 12.6%. And the population 95 and over grew by 48.6%. As they get older and older and older, each one of these age groups is exponentially more apt to die anyway by naturally the rate of aging, right? Another thing here is the population size of older age groups 2010 to 2020. I just wanted to show you 65 to 74. This is 2010 and a bar here, and 2020 is that much of an increase. It went from 21.7 to 33.1 million. And 75 to 84, that's those increases in bars, just so that you can, it's those increases right there in a bar graph to just give you a visualization of what's going on there. Another chart that I find very interesting, I'll blow this up a little bit. It's a little fuzzy because it wasn't meant to be blown up a little bit, but you get the idea here. Population 65 years and over by size and percent of the total population, 1920 to 2020. So this is 100 years. 1920 to 2020. And you can see the exponential increase in population over 65 all right there, right? This is 2020, 2010, 2000, 1990, 1980, 1970, 1960, 1950, 1940, 1930, 1920. Now, this line down here is the percentage of total population. Okay, the percentage of total population and of over 65 and how that goes up. Okay, from 1920 to, that's that 1,000% increase, right? Wasn't it? It was 1,000% increase from 1920 to 2020. Now I got another interesting graph to show you. Take this blue graph right here and put it side by side with this. This is this right here is excess deaths. And this is Denis Rancourt down here on the bottom. These three individuals are discussing this graph. I think this is 2020 here, so I don't know what year they were actually discussing this. But they bring it to 2020 and beyond here. And they've got this chart here, okay? 100 years here. This chart right here is only from 2000 to 2020. And so it's just these last three bars. So as you zoom in, this bump is going to... This is the population over 65 increase. This is the baby boom bump. This is the effect of the baby boom exponentially increasing the population percentage of 65 and older. This line represents that increase in population here. This line right here represents, in the United States, excess deaths. Do they look close, or is it me, or are they almost identical? Is it me, or are they pretty much identical? But I want you to listen to what they say.
There is maybe you can see a little bit increase like on the baseline, but here, this is it. This vertical line here shows the month of February 2020, right before the World Health Organization announced the pandemic. So they announced it on March 11, 2020. And these data are by month. And you see, as soon as they announced it, or in March, we see like this huge increase in mortality, and we are reaching a totally new regime like we've never seen before in the United States, at least for the last 20 years.
Never seen it.
And even before. Yeah, and that's crazy. So this is what we were thinking, what could it be? And let's dig into this. What is so special?
And the seasonal variations before the COVID period, you can go back to the Second World War, and before the Second World War, the beginning of the century, and so on. It's a very well-known phenomenon, very regular, and it occurs everywhere in the mid-latitude countries, in the northern and southern hemisphere. It's a very fundamental phenomenon that is not completely understood. There's still a lot of debate as to why there is this pattern. But the point is, there is a regular pattern. There is a clear historic trend. And then, as you said, Madine, there's this break to a new regime where we don't.
Does it sound to you? Did you hear him? Does it sound like he's taken the baby boom bump into consideration in that excess death rate curve at all? You're saying they don't know what it is. I mean, it's a phenomenon. It's happening. Everybody knows it's happening, but we don't know what it is. Just saying. Just consider too again that this graph here that they're considering is just these last three bars, and it's going to jump up. The more you zoom in on this, the more it's going to look like it jumped up, right? Is that a hockey stick? Is that the exponential death hockey stick? Maybe if you called it the hockey stick, it would fly, right? Maybe. Something to take into consideration there too. Yeah. Some information for your consideration. We're winding down here. Furthermore, also, per the U.S. Census data, okay? I don't know what the hell's going on here, but anyways, per the U.S. Census data, older adults age 65 and older, the growth rate of 65 and over population from 2020 to 2023, we were just talking about 2010 to 2020, from 2020 to 23, the 65 and older population grew by another 9.4%, on average in America by another 9.4%, to approximately 59.2 million nationally. The population of older adults increases in every U.S. metro area except in Eagle Pass, Texas. Right? Where they had the lowest percentage of deaths over 65. Remember, they were only 70%. Only 70%. But I got a chart here to kind of show you something here. This is that 9.4% national increase in population of over 65 between 2020 and 2023. But over here, the growth rate of that age group was the highest at 23.1% in Florida. So it's Myrtle Beach, but it's in Florida. So what I wanted to I kind of dug into that just to see where that led. And I said, note that the highest increase in population percentage in elderly above being in Florida, which could account for much, or even most of the COVID excess deaths that some, including here in this study, and Brownstone, probably one is just the same as the other, Brown University School of Public Health, right? Here, in this paper, they're blaming that exponential increase in 65, increase in population over 65, that correlation to people that are going to be dying anyway, the exponential increase in people that are going to be dying. And they're saying that they're blaming those increased people in that population over 65 dying at an exponentially increasing rate. They're correlating that to the fact that Florida pushed back on the COVID narrative protocol, centralized protocol, and the vaccines, that they pushed back on it. Yeah, they and Florida, they blamed that increased population and the increased death of that population that's going to happen anyways on Florida's perceived pushback or noncompliance to centralized COVID narratives, protocol, and countermeasures. Yeah, it's nuts. I don't know how it correlates to the other ones, but I dug into this one just to see what it was. And yeah, they tried to take advantage of that increase in over 65 to push to shit on Florida, to shit on anybody who was trying to wiggle out of the freaking tyranny of COVID, the centralized tyranny of COVID, the centralized collectivism. You can't have a centralized anything without collectivism, and that's the point. Regarding excess pandemic deaths in the U.S., all-cause U.S. mortality rate stays high. This is from June 2023. This article. At least 222,198 people died in the United States from all causes in May of 23. Right? According to the preliminary data accompanying the CDC's latest weekly influenza report, that was 5.6% higher than the total CDC report for May of 2022. So a year earlier, it's 5.6% higher than a year earlier. And it was 21% higher than the period from 2017 to 2019. From 27 to 2019. But you got to remember that population increase over 65 coming from the baby boom bump is also coming up into play in this whole thing too, right? It was 21% higher than the period from 27 to 2019. The current preliminary from 2023 May death count is still 5.6% higher than the 2017 to 2019 May average, based on the CDC's final data for each year. So 2023 death count is still 5.6% higher. Yeah, that's not just over 65, but what they're saying is that these people died, but what percentage of these people died were over 65? Odds are, if past precedent is anything, right? And they're just saying that that's 5%. All-cause mortality was 5.4% higher than in 2017 to 2019, an April average. But I just wanted to point out, too, is that as per the Swiss study below, total U.S. excess deaths for 23 wound up being at between 3 and 7% for that year. 3 and 7%, which would also be more than accounted for by the introduction of exponentially increasing percentage of the population being over 65, right? Not saying, they're just information for your consideration. Keep in mind also that this was while 65 age group in the U.S. is experiencing its quote-unquote largest ever 10-year numeric gain. So was it 52% between 64 and 74? Right? Anywhere between some of the older age group, 48% and over 95. They're experiencing a big increase in the percentage of their population, right? Out of Switzerland, the future excess mortality of COVID-19. Out of Switzerland. Yeah. Per the interactive chart in this article, age standardized excess deaths in the U.S. went from 18.9% in 2020 to a high of 22.9% in 2021, then steadily down to 4.7% in 2023. Yeah, one study just said it had between 3 and 7. They're saying that it was 4.7. So it's right in that category. But excess deaths in the U.S. went from 18.9% in 2020 to a high of 22.9%. But if you've got exponential increases in the population over 65 and that are increasingly more apt to be dying anyways, exponentially, their chances of dying are exponentially increasing anyways, how much of that is, being interpreted in some scientific paper to push a COVID narrative, or to push whatever narrative, could be pushing any narrative they want. There could be a lot of bullshit coming off that, So it's spinning narratives, because you could spin narrative on anything. You could spin narrative on any science. They got a whole science on it. It's called I did a show on it where evidence-based policy, and the whole thing about evidence-based policy is adding the narrative to the data. It's not the data on any scientific paper or publication or study that matters. You got to make it sellable to policymakers and funders. You got to put storylines in there, right? They teach whole courses in colleges, Cornell being one of them, where they teach these up and coming scientists to query the data and spin yarns. At which point the applied psychology techniques are spun into the storylines and the narratives of this to create for all kinds of applied psychology techniques, whether it's the halo effect, whether it's the nudge techniques, or motivational interviewing skills, or choice architecture, and all social contract theory, and all these other things that they use. It's that point where they put the narrative or the storyline to the data is the point where applied psychology techniques are interjected into the whole concept of things. And this whole evidence-based policy it's where they literally centralize truth. I did a whole show on it. They centralize truth, and it can't be overturned by your professional doctor because it's centralized. It's top down. It's not like evidence-based medicine, where the evidence-based medicine hierarchy establishes what is or what isn't the best kind of scientific studies, like the whole thing where they modeling is like the worst, right? But evidence-based policy hierarchy establishes top-down, central planners on down, and that's it. That's COVID, the whole centralized COVID freaking protocols, in a nutshell right there. But in this study here, it says excess mortality in the U.S. and U.K. Study. In this research, the Institute projects excess mortality in the U.S. and U.K. over the next 10 years. under different scenarios. We find that the excess mortality persists today and may potentially continue for the next decade. Our general population forecast suggests that excess mortality will gradually tail off by 2033 to 0 to 3% in the U.S. and 0 to 2.5% in the U.K. In comparison, by our calculation, excess mortality in 2023. Why is that when they're going to start finally taking into consideration the population curve, the baby boomer population? If they start taking that into consideration after they did what they needed to do, the whole COVID pandemic thing, right? I don't know. I don't know where they're getting that or how they get that, the modeling that they use. Models only spit out products. You know, you make a cake, the cake is a result of the ingredients, right? Or whatever you're making. Same with this shit here. In comparison, by our calculations, excess mortality in 2023 was in the range of 3 to 7% for the U.S. and 5.8% in the U.K. Under our optimistic scenario, we find that the U.S. and U.K. pandemic-linked excess mortality would disappear by 2028. Reverting to pre-pandemic mortality expectations under a pessimistic scenario, we expect excess mortality to remain elevated until 2033. At which point the baby boomer bump in the pyramid starts to die off, right? And there's less and less and less of it there. Canada. In Canada, it's not just a U.S. thing, it's around the world thing. I've showed you a couple things from around the world, a couple others to take into consideration here as I kind of wrap this thing up. In Canada, baby boomers are currently accelerating. This is from, I don't know what year this was. Okay. Baby boomers are currently accelerating population aging, 2016 to 2021. Okay. The numbers of people aged 65 or over increased by 18.3%. 18.3%. That's the excess deaths within are they within that number? You know, this is the second largest increase in 75 years after the one observed in 2011 to 2016, which was plus 20%. Okay, this out of France. I got these two population pyramid, baby boomer bump population pyramid things. Like this chart on the left here is from 1982. The one on the right is from 2020. Okay, in the 2020 chart, boomers are now between 50. And this one on the left, the boomer box down here is all are below 40 years of age in 1982. Over here in 2020, the boomers are now between 50 and 75 years old. Even with an improved life expectancy due to a better living standard and healthcare, the age pyramid alone could explain an increase in the number of deaths in recent years. You think? But there it is. At least somebody. You know? If the life expectancy had remained the same, this is an interesting take here. If the life expectancy had remained the same, we should in fact have observed the equivalent increase in the number of deaths. Right? But instead of going from 550,000 to about 840,000, the increase by only 10% to 612,000. So do we have a death deficiency instead of excess deaths? Is that what they're saying? Now what? Right? Excess deaths in other parts of Europe. I got this impact of COVID-19 and total excess mortality and geographic disparities in Europe, 2020 to 2023. It's this one. We estimated excess deaths across all countries over 4 years to be in Europe to be at 8%. Okay, Europe's excess deaths across all country over 4 years was 8%. They say average the averages, and they got 8% excess death rate. At what percent was their increase in population over 65, right? But then they broke it down here a little bit. They have the excess number of excess deaths for Italy was plus 8.7%. Poland was 13.7%. Germany 5.6%. Then they have this what they call the relative. In relative terms, they give much higher numbers for Bulgaria, Lithuania, and Slovakia. I have no idea what that relative terms is. Like I said, that word relative, you can throw some shit in the game with just that one word. Relative risk reduction versus absolute risk reduction. I mean, what are we talking about here? I don't know. The percent of the population living below the poverty line and the index, Gini index, I don't know, were significantly associated with an increased excess death rate. So again, we got more Kool-Aid drinking in here. We got more opportunities to push to show that they're drinking the Kool-Aid and justify increased need for redistributive justice, right? The percentage of people fully vaccinated by the end of 2021 were inversely associated with the excess deaths. So again, they're going to say the excess deaths are because people weren't vaccinated, drinking the Kool-Aid. Look at us, man. We're pushing the narrative. Meanwhile, we're presenting data that would have been there anyway to justify what we're justifying. Interpretation: the observed geographic disparities in total mortality excess across Europe can be related to differences in socioeconomic contexts, as well as suboptimal vaccine uptakes in some countries. Again, drinking the Kool-Aid, pushing the world socialism of redistributive justice, sustainable development goals, human rights. It's all the same. Climate change, all the same. It's all the same communism, the same collectivism that's always the cure, right? Using the data that may or may not have already been there anyways, regardless of what was happening, right? Since 1825 anyway, right? On the data side, I got this chart here I wanted to show you too, which is kind of weird. Lithuania was one of those countries that had like the relative high excess death rates, but they got this chart between 2014 and 2024 that show the population over 65 years of age increase in the share of population age 65 years or over between 2014 and 2024. So all these countries had increase in population over 65. All of them. You know, Poland was the highest, right? And up here, Poland, they had here the 13.7% excess deaths. Well, coincidentally, right? Poland down here had the highest percentage increase in ages over 65. Doesn't mean anything, right? Nothing to see here at all, right? For more on European excess deaths, you can go to this article here. I'm not going to go down through it, but it's got a lot of freaking, you can rip into that, probably quarry that for whatever data you're looking for, because it's got a shit ton. Another chart that I want to show here is monthly excess mortality in December of 2024 in Europe. This is Europe. This shows Europe. Monthly excess mortality in December of 2024. Okay. This up here was July of 2024, these numbers, and they had Lithuania up here at 16.7%, and they got Lithuania, where is it? Lithuania right here. They got there's only one really close to zero here on this, but just a couple months before that, they had it up to 16.1% excess deaths, relative, whatever the frick that means, right? But I just wanted to point this out too, is that, which is kind of weird considering it's been said here, Lithuania's excess mortality returns to pre-pandemic levels. But they say here that during the peak of the coronavirus pandemic, Lithuania, I'll learn how to talk, recorded 70% more deaths than usual. It's just bizarre, that range that they have on something, you know. New Zealand, interactive population pyramid for New Zealand. I can show you this here. This is New Zealand. And clicking down the dates here, you could see the population is increasing. And this is the age. That bump, we're getting up 2014, that bump is, you got a bigger bump coming up into 60. They got, of course, now they get into projections, right? They get into projections, but because they're all worried about the baby boomer problem, basically dead weight to society, how much it's going to cost. You know, the whole Ezekiel Manual True Lives system, what do they call it? True Lives system or some shit like that, right? The New Zealand facing demographic disruption. Baby boomers currently aged between 56 and 74 are boosting the numbers of those aged over 65 from 600,000 in 2013 to well over 1 million in the early 2030s. You can figure out what the percent is. In review, okay, in review. In 2020, adults 65 or older accounted for 16% of the population, but only 16% of the population, but 80% of the COVID deaths in the U.S. Just 10 years between 2010 and 2020, the percentage of U.S. populations of those 65 and older experienced the largest percentage point increase from 13% to 16.8% of the total population, more than twice as fast as the previous decade, from 2000 to 2010. Whereas before 2010, it took 50 years for that same population increase to happen. Also, from 2010 to 2020, the population percentage of those 65 to 75 years old in the U.S. increased by 52%. 75 to 84 year age group increased by 25.1%. 85 to 94 increased by 12.6%. The population of 95 years or older increased by 48.6%. I don't know what that would all average out to, but it doesn't really matter. Furthermore, 65 and older population percentage in the U.S. grew on an average another 9.4% between 2020 and 2023. Meanwhile, excess deaths between 2020 and 2022 ran at 18.9%, 2020 up to 22.9% in 2021, then steadily declined from there to 4.7% in 2023. So there you have it. Some numbers to take into your consideration, some potential manipulation of data that would have been there, the availability of data that's always been there to be able to manipulate, to push whatever agenda that they want to push. All they got to do is weave the narrative to however they want to boost whatever agenda they want to push. I'm not saying that's what's happening. I'm just putting it out there that with these things are not those things possible. It's just information for you to take into consideration. Again, thank you for, I hope you got something out of it. You know, I got a show I want to do on oxygen toxicity. That one should be kind of cool too. Also, you know, there's different things that the medical freedom movement, other things that the medical freedom movement is sitting on. You know, things to take into consideration and should be taken into consideration that they're sitting on or guarding from happening. They're, you know, I don't know. but we're going to take some of these things on and we're going to put it out there for your consideration. They're not going to do it, but we will. I know Jonathan Koo, Dr. Jonathan Koo, he's been taking some of these things, this population pyramid thing, is he's been saying this population pyramid thing has an effect on it, and they've been using it as an excuse to do a lot of nefarious things, including murder. Those bumps in 2020, 21, 22, what are they? What are they? Just information for you to take into consideration. Thank you for stopping by the Liberty Perspective. And until the next time, I'm Joe Marshall, and thank you.